In a world ensnared by omniscient polarization, civil, efficient, and inspiring civil discourse acts as the antidote. The Philo Colloquium forms part of a larger initiative to restore the revered Philo Mirror, which itself began in the early 1800s as the first student-led publication on campus. In tandem with the recent new Blue Book policies, the Colloquium will act as a tangible platform for students to share their ideas on prominent political, philosophical, and historical topics, granting them the tools to develop crucial argumentative literacy that can be transformed into many facets of daily academia and general life. Formulating around motions debated by past members of the Society, we hope to instill the same fervor of academic curiosity, vitality, and accuracy within the Colloquium participants and the audience. To achieve such goals, we intend to digitalize each session, providing an outlet to consolidate the veracity of civil discourse shared between students. Consequently, we can transfer vital discussion points of the Colloquium members across our school and the globe beyond. I would like to highlight a principal element of the Philo Colloquium that may appear relatively unconventional in standard interpretations of modern civil discourse. Arguably, perfect civil discourse is idealistic, given the inevitable ideological differences shared across all humankind. In the Philo Colloquium, I hope to create a platform that does not aspire for utopic civil discourse, but rather embraces the value of its inherent complexity and multifaceted nature. Subsequently, the variety of motions selected are intentionally complex, such as this House believes America is incapable of reaching its political zenith, a motion that is particularly relevant during our current national and global political climate. Here, participants must be willing to embrace the discomfort of opposing views, provoking them to glean their arguments from diverse philosophies and ideological doctrines. We aim to encourage that one cannot remain passive towards such prominent topics and must rather utilize the assets of evidence, analysis, and engaging speech delivery to match the opposition. True civil discourse is comprised of articulate argumentation, denying attributes of tautology and equivocation identified with many controversial leaders across human history. Instead, our arguments must be concise, impactful, and fruitful, blending creative interpretation with accuracy and truth. Thus, the Philo Colloquium serves as an opportunity to establish said argumentative truth, availing the skills of debate to craft novel wisdom on topics that are important in modern times. Voltaire once said, "We must cultivate our own garden," inferring the necessity of personal intervention to achieve an inspiring result. Within the Colloquium, we can draw from Voltaire's words, cultivating our own gardens of proactive reasoning and civil discourse. Thank you.
Hello all, my name is Luke Fernandez Suarez, a senior board member of the Philomathean Society. I want to start this speech by thanking you all for participating on this project. Without your generous donation of time and effort, our struggle to provide the mirror would not be possible. This year is the 200th anniversary of the Philomathean Society. For 2 whole centuries, our organization has weathered all of the turmoil and the chaos that occurred all around it. This basic debate society is not merely a club, it is an inseparable fixture of Phillips Academy. It's right art, you can say. You're part of a great legacy, part of something that is beyond yourselves. With this in mind, I find it appropriate to recount in brief the story tale of our institution. Philo was founded in 1825 by Horatio Balch-Benedict and Ray Palmer after being rejected from the only club on campus known as the Social Fraternity, a society that functioned at the time largely descended of the organization. Phillips Academy at the time was divided into a strict hierarchy, with older students having most of the power on campus. Benedict and Palmer were both 14, and were part of the older cohort, but not old enough to enter a pre-established society. As much as such, they decided to found their own group to rival the fraternity. The first recorded meeting of the Philomathean Society took place on January 5th, 1825, which established a constitution, rules within the organization, and established an official library of the society, which held numerous volumes of Bible works at the time. The preamble part to the document states their intention, saying, "The great object of society is mutual improvement, confidently believing therefore that, with proper rules and regulations, and a prompt and vigorous execution of such rules and regulations, this great object may be accomplished. a sense of duty, together with an earnest desire to discipline and expand our minds, improve our intellectual faculties generally, and above all, our manners, impels us to enter this social compact and look into the all-wise being for aid, and earnestly and devoutly imploring him to give us wisdom to direct us in the path of duty, and finally lead us to a happier, more prosperous times. We solemnly pledge ourselves to abide by and support every article of this Constitution. Philo to this day is an organization built upon the principle of self-improvement, built on the governing structure, which is still recognizable with a small board managing daily affairs of the club. Indeed, one thing that has certainly never changed is Philo's importance as a vehicle for discussion and learning about current questions and topics around the world. This is a feature of Philo that seemingly never changes. In the first years of Philo, some of the most important debate resolutions were about fate, women's rights, and slavery. An important vehicle for this discourse was Through the Mirror, our own debate publication. As part of a greater effort to celebrate the 200-year anniversary of our institution, we decided to revive the publication, and today marks the start of the process. Knowledge is strength, my friends. Remember that. Let this exercise inspire you to learn, to grow, and to ask questions. For in order to better the world, we must have debate. So without further ado, let us begin. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Philo Colloquium. Today we will be arguing the motion this House believes in free will. Now, following the standard of the traditional debate, let us define terms. How do we define free will in this discussion?
I believe we should define free will. The definition of free will consists of two parts. First, that the person has the ability to choose between two different options, at least two different options. And second, any results or any consequence of their actions is ultimately their fault or their moral responsibility.
Is there any objections to that? All right, well, let's begin.
Floor is open.
I'd like to argue against free will. I hope nothing bad happens to me since I'm in the chapel, but here's my argument. So, we know that we are made out of cells, and the cells are made out of organelles. Organelles which are made out of atoms, biomolecules, and atoms are made out of quarks. But quarks, to our knowledge, you can predict its movements with the correct equipment. So, hypothetically speaking, if we had a supercomputer, like a quantum computer, some alien tech, it could theoretically predict the trajectory of every electron, atom, quark. And I'm no scientist here, but I think if that such thing does exist, then it can predict. Since it's different layers, so atoms dictates organelles, cells, and then us. So I think it would be able to predict our actions, therefore making the entire history of the universe already written since the Big Bang.
So then, from that argument, do you claim that perhaps moral conceptions of free will abide by the same rules as scientific examples of it?
I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. However, if there is merely an illusion of free will, that will do. Because if you know that if you do one thing or another, it will result in different things to your knowledge. So you will still have the illusion of free will, but that's all that matters to us.
For most of history, there's been talk about the separation between the body and the soul. Whether we believe in that or not is up also kind of debate. But perhaps we're going to run out of time, or even the process of itself. But if we're talking about the body and the matter itself, sure, we can definitely argue that for one, perhaps things are determined, but there is an argument to be made about, first of all, the soul. How about the soul? Do you think the soul is the same as the body, or do you think there's a separation between the two?
I believe there's a separation between the body and the soul. And I believe that the soul is in charge of your decision-making processes. And I'm intrigued by this idea that if you had an advanced enough quantum supercomputer to predict every single movement. However, even nowadays, we know that, for instance, can exist at one point in time, but we don't know where exactly. So, possibly, we need to make a supercomputer that can track every single movement, but we won't know where the atom will be at a particular time. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is because, sure, we can track movement, but we don't know where it's going, what direction of the atom necessarily at any given moment, at every given millisecond. So, it's an interesting idea, but I disagree with it. Now, moving on to this idea that the soul, the separation between the body and the soul. I believe that soul is part of your, is in charge of your decision-making processes, and I believe that free will is attached to the soul, which is why I believe only people have souls, so only human beings have souls, and that's why they can make decisions. And I do believe in free will, and I think free will exists because there are instances where people choose different things and there's different outcomes. It's an observable reality. And not only that, there is also, I also believe in morality, which is obviously very much entangled in this debate about free will. We cannot talk about free will without talking morality, at least some minuscule amount. And I believe that there is right and good actions. And I believe that people constantly do right or bad actions, right or bad actions constantly. So therefore, I have to believe in free will.
And before we go further, I think that we're calling into question a great number of ideas. We're calling into question many religious foundations. We're calling into question our legal system, because our legal system relies on the fact that people made these decisions consciously, and that they decided to commit that crime, to kill that person, to do that thing. And it's against the moral fabric of our very society. And because of that, I think that free will is a thing, that people have the right and the ability to make their own decisions, and that we've created these societies and these systems because of the fact that we believe that free will is a thing, and that whether you believe that's been given to you by God or by the universe or by some other untouchable or unfathomable, infathomable object, then we're here, and we can make our own decision. I'm here right now because I made a conscious decision to be here. I thought about it. I was like, should I go, should I not? And in the end, I came here and I'm here. Glad I did. Yeah, thanks.
I would like to argue against free will and the point of whether the body and the soul is separate. I would like to argue that it's actually not separate, but without giving an example. So, for example, say apple or banana. Say choose apple. If we were to go back into the time, we would choose. Oh, fine, choose apple or banana. Banana. Okay. Now, if we went back in time to the moment where I asked you that question, would you agree that if the circumstances were exactly the same as we went back in time, would you pick banana over and over, or would there be one instance if you wouldn't pick banana?
That's a good question. I think it really depends. Well, this kind of stems to the greater idea of free will. Free will can be effective outside your circumstances. But at the end of the day, I choose. Perhaps argue that a little bit of precipitation may be effect. Maybe second does more first thing, maybe choose apple or banana. But I think it would give it each chance.
Even, but you said like the first genus, like maybe like concrete or something like that. However, if you look back in time, you have the exact same circumstances. You have the exact same like feelings of hunger as games. Would you agree?
Yeah, sure. I'll probably want to choose banana every single time.
And why not every single time?
Because there's always. Is a great question, and the reason why is because there's never 100% certainty of anything. I mean, should I choose, there's always a chance I choose banana over apple over banana, even if let's say it's 0.0001%. But for the sake of argumentation, yes, I choose 100% for banana.
So you would choose banana every single time. So the outcome would be the same thing every single time. Is that, I guess your point of saying, free will is, we find free will is like two or more outcomes, right? Or like the same directly related to it?
I thought it was two or more choices. And you can have, the definition was two or more choices, and then there's consequences to either choice.
Oh, okay.
So it's not necessarily, and I like what you said about the fact that you would go back in time, exact same circumstances, what would you choose, right? But I think that's also, that's an interesting idea, but not necessarily 100%, I would say, related to free will. I think we talk about improbability, and why I chose to, let's say, this fine gentleman over here chose bananas over apples. But there was decision making behind that choice. And just because he would repeat the same choice over and over again doesn't mean that he doesn't have free will. It just means he really likes that choice. We don't necessarily disprove free will. And I would also like to ask a question to the group. Do you believe that we are influenced by our environments? Our free will is like if free will stems solely from probability or choices, or a catalog of choices beforehand.
So Matthew brought up the multiple world theory, I believe, with the apples and bananas. And that relates to quantum physics. And the thing about quantum physics is we don't know much about it. I personally believe in free will, but as far as science now suggests, there is no free will separated from the body and soul. I grew up reading Yuval Noah Harari's books, so as far as I'm concerned, the soul and body are the same thing, and there is no soul solely in humans. If there was a soul, then it would be in probably every conscious organism. And when I say conscious, I mean organisms with essentially a brain. Yeah.
This is okay. I think to try to bring together all the arguments, let's talk about the different theories of free will, how they're all associated. This is a great point you brought up, this idea of you having to have a brain to have free will. But the truth of the matter is, there's many different ways to think about this. One way to think about it. There's also the idea of having to have reason and intellect to be associated with it. There's also many different traditions, even in the book of religion, many ways to think about it. There's the idea that there's the idea of predestination from Calvin, which is this idea that all your fate, that you're basically destined to do things, and only God has. It's only God. Only the universe has the supreme force to decide where you're going. Kind of leading to what current science, as Calvin was saying. There's also the idea that even though there is the universe that works, or God works, God being all knowing and knowing where how things will end up doesn't mean that you are separate from free will. This was this idea of libertarianism, which is that you're all subject to free will. There's others that believe that we are. It's because there are natural conditions that we're subject to free will. That we're sort of subject to free will, but not exactly. And then there's another group that suggests that even if free will is real, it has nothing to do with morality. And those are just things that we're
I think I'd also like to explore, as you ended, the notion and the connection of free will to this idea of moral responsibility, in the sense that if you do evaluate free will on the grounds of morality, on the grounds of moral responsibility, are we saying that there is a definite moral order that we all abide by, that may designate whether or not our free will is justifiable or perhaps inaccurate? What do we think?
I think maybe even before we get into this kind of conversation, we should caution against the thought that just because there are such technologies, there are technologies that just don't exist yet. You brought up the example of the advanced supercomputer, that just because they don't exist, they will never exist. And because of that, then, we're creating a finite space, we're creating a finite God, where free will cannot live, right? Because if we're talking about I think maybe a better way to put it would just be like, say that I believe in free will, and I think that, people should have, people have the right to make their choices, but if we're talking, then if we extend this to probability, then ultimately, then we will not have free will. Everything will be predictable. Everything, by the supercomputer, everything will be, told. And I think we should think about it in a more human way rather than in terms of probabilities, because there are contradicting ideas in that regard. Some people say there's never a 100% chance, while others say that everything is predictable no matter what. So.
I agree. I understand your sentiment, but then I also feel that given our scientific analysis of the world past, that, for example, quantum mechanics, the operations within quantum mechanics have been tied quite closely to philosophy. because we can assign philosophical interpretations to the scientific emblems of the world. So perhaps in a quantum physics world where free will may exist to some degree, as Tiger mentioned earlier, there is some form of reckoning or similarity to our morality.
I think we have a question. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay. Thank you. I have a question for the second speaker from the left.
Yes.
Yeah.
John.
No.
Tiger.
Yes. So you essentially said, right, that with a technology advanced enough, we could effectively predict every movement of every person in the world ever. So I guess my question is, do you think that just because the world history is predictable or inevitable, that means it's not free? Like, just because we can understand and sort of like, I guess, completely see everything that will ever happen, that doesn't really take away the fact that it still occurred by the force of the free will of each individual person. So just because we can observe it doesn't make it any less free. What do you think about that?
So it hypothetically would work, but we have limited knowledge about quantum physics, and as far as we're concerned, like quarks have been known to change state, matter, and trajectory, but it's not widely proven. But scientists do believe that because there's many things we cannot explain, such as gravity, dark matter, etc. So I think essentially, if history was predictable, like if the supercomputer could directly tell us our future, I wouldn't know if we would take the initiative to change the trajectory of our future.
I have a question, guys. Let's break this all together. What are the arguments that are in favor of free will? Well, let's think about that.
Well, one of my biggest arguments in favor of free will is that I believe free will needs to exist in order for us to judge our past, and for us in order to draw conclusions from our past. For instance, how do we say a world leader has acted in an unfair or unjust way, or a historical figure has done great evil? If we don't believe in free will, we can't do that. Because if we remove free will, we cannot remove the logic that A, they could have not done that, and two, there is moral culpability from those bad actors, evil people. And you can even think of some historical figures like Tamer Lane or Genghis Khan, who conquered a large part of the world and committed many atrocities. They didn't need to live that life. In fact, Genghis Khan was very likely was not on a trajectory. In his early life, if you would see his early life, you would not have thought this man will conquer a good portion of the world. It was a choice he made, and he made small choices, like killing his brothers, killing his enemies, and eventually proved more power as a choice. And I think the only way to judge them is judge moral culpability, either judge good from evil, or right from wrong, or something's an atrocity, is if the people have free will not to commit those atrocities, to be good or to do good.
But then, to that point, and drawing back to, I guess, earlier discussions, do you feel that there is a definite moral order, like you mentioned, good and evil, or bad and wrong?
The short answer to that is yes. It's due to personal beliefs. I do believe there's good and evil. And we can, that's related, but perhaps separate debates. But I believe the only way you can actually judge good and evil is if people have free will, or else they wouldn't be committing evil. They're just products of their environment, or they're just quarks or atoms moving in the universe. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just doing what atoms and quarks sometimes do. They just do these things. So no, I do believe. The short answer is yes. I do believe that there's a moral framework to the universe. And long answer, I believe it's mostly due to the fact that that's the way you really judge moral culpability.
And to that point, does anybody repudiate that notion that there is a stringent definition of good and evil? And how does that relate to free will? Does anybody, I guess, reject that notion of a stringent morality?
many psalms that talk about how good and evil has been done on the people of Israel, and how, there are many, like Noah's Ark, for example, right? The faded story where God tells Noah, the world is going to flood, and this is going to happen, Noah, is that right, or is that wrong? Is there a good reason for it? And then, does that say, is that meant to say, his faith and his free will, like, could he not have done it? Could he have just chosen to disregard the message that he got? And there are all sorts of questions that come up when you just say free will is not. And that's really important to think about.
I think like the opposing side of this argument, well, first of all, who's on the opposing side? Like it's me and it's like,
There is no.
oh, there's no side, oh, okay.
It's more discussion.
Oh, discussion,
Now we're
right.
talking about the pros.
Oh.
Free will, if you want, we're documentally switching more to the negatives of the yes.
Are we talking about the pros of free will or the proof of free will?
We're going to do it. Let's do it.
So, you were talking about like the moral perspective. I think the opposing side was from more like a scientific perspective, like you said before, right? So like you said, like if you view humans as just like atoms or exploding in space, I think there is something to that because like I said earlier, we're all made up of these cells of atoms, and these atoms they stay represented by pool balls. Right? I made for this example before. If, for example, you take a snapshot of time, you create like a really big pool table, and every single atom is a pool ball. There are defined rules of physics, and I think we all agree that there are some rules of physics that all atoms follow, and all things follow. So if you were to calculate the movement of all these atoms and how they interact with each other, like even with neurons of the brain, like with decision making, these neurons like can be predicted by previous stimuli. And if you were to observe and create a hypothetical supercomputer, then you could tell where the atoms will move and what would happen next. And even pretty important saying that you can't determine an atom's location as of like today's technology and everything. If you were to somehow do it, like which have something to say by magic, or somehow hypothetically to do it, you would be able to track where these atoms go, where they interact. And I think from a scientific point, that stands up.
I agree with that notion, and I do feel that also, yes, indeed, obviously, the scientific perspective is more secular, perhaps not grounded in these biblical themes that do conflate or relate to, I guess, more stringent perceptions of morality. And I feel that it's also interesting, perhaps, to bring up a more unique argument in the sense that by resorting to those scientific impressions, we don't necessarily have to restrict like our perceptions of humans to atoms floating through space. We can still assign those ideas of morality, albeit less stringent and simplistic as those biblical ones, if that makes sense.
Well, I think another case to look at is if we use actual case twin studies, if you know what that is, essentially there's pros for the 20th century, there's studies not to separate things that occur, to study how their trajectories in life change or differ. And it's fascinating how oftentimes it happens to us. But how oftentimes people, either these individuals actually end up having very similar lives, and actually end up having so exploring, like being interested in the same things, vacationing in the same places. So there is an argument to be made about how much not only how much does our own like way of life, like our way that we were born, the way of our attitude affect our decisions, and also the exterior environment. There's also a lot of that's a big argument to have. And whether or not the truth of the matter is that if you're talking about only scientific or perhaps more esoteric or philosophical way to think about it, you're missing parts of pieces of like the puzzle, it's like the thing. It's supposed to be more.
Yeah.
But essentially, yeah, it's true. Perhaps it's a little bit of both. Perhaps we do have free will, but oftentimes our environment impacts us. And oftentimes perhaps the way that our works in our body work, perhaps that also affects the way we act. That's full up for discussion. You measure how much it actually affects us, as you know. I think now it's important to talk about perhaps some arguments against free will. What are some ways we go against this?
Before then, I just wanted to say that I think inviting this question up to this board kind of just already questions like what are the rules? Can we say that there are absolutes? Like what? I mean, if there are absolutes, then I mean that means I suppose that would mean that everything is free will, but there is no free will, right? And so I mean that would go into question some of what you're saying, and again that would go, like I said before, that would also go into question some of the legal, perspectives that we've established about good, moral, legal, conscious ability, incompetence, competence, whatever. And I mean, so I really just want to ask you, what about that? What if we don't have it? What if we can't say for certain that this will drop, in this way 100% of the time within this fixed point in reality? What would you say there?
What would I say would happen if that was true?
Yeah, well, I mean, not necessarily just if that was true, but if that was called into question, if that wasn't the case based on this.
What we were saying is that we do have free will and that these motives come into play. But if that would happen, I think, well, that would obviously have a huge impact on the legal system, as you said. And I think from that perspective, then, like you said, if these theoretical rulers did have a choice, then we could see them as like in a different way. But I think if that were true, then people would view a lot of things in our lives very differently. But yeah,
I think there's, to your point, what's some negatives of free will, some arguments against free will. I don't think there's necessarily arguments that are like, why is free will bad? I don't think so. I think there's arguments against free will or free will. There's a lot of great things that people brought up. So, for instance, we were able to find technologies why I said or bad. Would that change my definition of free will? Or like, okay, so like, let's say the work is looking right, and we know exactly what's going to move right. I don't necessarily know like that's like we can pre-predict when we're going to move right or left. That's an interesting possibility in a sense that doesn't exist yet. I wouldn't be able to rule on that how it would affect the framework. And I sometimes I talk about this idea of free will and perspective, right? So like some people might say, okay, historically, there's some great people, there's some people who did great things and did some very bad things. I think we have enough of our founding fathers to look back on. And we see people can see many people in different lights based on their own morality, but I believe there are some things that are objectively bad. Slavery, for one, killing innocent people. And I also involved with interesting ideas like, can we take science, this idea of like more of a secular idea of like, okay, we know that maybe we can predict what people do, maybe the world doesn't actually exist, and maybe we can still like transpose moral assumptions onto this movements or arguments. I don't think that's necessarily possible. And I think not necessarily because of the science, but because once you remove free will from the equation, you cannot morally say, okay, is someone owning another person is necessarily a bad thing. You cannot, once you have that, once you remove free will in people's choice in doing things, morality falls apart. As a society, now I want to say one thing I would say that I think is free will. Like for instance, let's say you're in say for instance, like if you're in this war zone, right, and you have to choose to survive, and you want to survive, it's like your natural instinct. What would you, if you say, well, I have free will, I can have this consciousness, I'm a conscious being, I'll try to do the most thing. But can't you? Your instinct takes over. Like for instance, if you're fighting for survival, like what's going to stop you from pushing someone else down to get into survival? And so like that's my biggest argument is free will. There's an element of instinct to our decisions, and therefore nothing is really our choice. I think that's just my best argument is free will. And as you can tell, I really can't argue against free will.
I'd like to add on to all of your points, starting with your focus on good and evil. So, biblical figures and Genghis Khan and the rest of us, we are all essentially made out of neurons, and neurons neurons, like matter, hormones, and what else? Muscle memory, and that's what dictates most of our actions in daily life. So, as you said on the battlefield, like I'm not sure if we can. I don't have a personal say in this, but I'm just going to say some things that we are currently science proves is true. I also wanted to add Rania's point. She said that we cannot be reduced to just neurons, and I think I agree with that because once if there's a significant number of things grouped together, it adds up a layer on, a pyramid and then layers cannot interact. That's why I believe, because we cannot interact with quantum physics. We don't exactly know what's going on there, and that's how it forms matter, it forms cells. And when a bunch of cells, neurons, group together, we do not know. We cannot simultaneously see all what the neurons are doing, and therefore, if such technology won't exist, it won't impact us. And when a bunch of neurons start talking to each other, they form the consciousness, which is on a different level of the pyramid. Therefore, I think that I'm going to rebut myself from before, but
That's always good.
yeah, it's not a supercomputer would not be able to predict your actions and thoughts.
I think also adding on to that, when we evaluate quantum mechanics perhaps, there is this element of uncertainty there that wasn't within previous science. For example, within Laplace's theories of determinism, that suggested that everything in the universe is predictable, and therefore that may dispute or reject notions of free will. But perhaps with quantum mechanics, there was a revolutionary change in which everything within science, within that small level of science, was reduced to probability theory instead, in the sense that we cannot predict those actions. We cannot predict what is happening. And I think that uncertainty is also very relevant in this debate and in this idea of free will.
I think adding on to all your points, I guess the question I have is that if you disagree with me, correct me, but I guess the big argument that we have, one of the biggest questions that comes from this question is, can we separate the body and the soul? And you talked about this level of consciousness and later, perhaps that's a way we need to justify scientifically there's a separation. Because every animal has a brain, but how come we wire our brains wired in such a way that we didn't have discussions about free will? Like, think about it. There's no other creature unless there's alien. Who knows? Maybe in 4 years we can see the poignant Mars or something will run into little big creatures, but until now, why are we getting just to think about this? And that's, one of the fundamental parts of free will, where when it separates us from other animals, so that we have free will, we have this idea of consciousness, this idea of reason, and this idea of no question of what matters. I'm not sure. Do you know what this is?
Okay, I'm gonna make this
Quick. So basically, sorry, did you say anything again?
Yeah. Fundamentally, we believe that this debate, we're all around this idea about the separation between the body and the soul,
There is no justification level that says that humans are the only ones that have souls. However, let's use the metaphor of water molecules, H2O. When a single water molecule does not mean much, but when a bunch come together, they form a totally new thing called wetness that can only be experienced through a significant gathering of H2O molecules. And the same goes for consciousness, which is soul in that case. I think when a bunch of neurons gather, you form a brand new, you go up a level on the pyramid, and it's something completely new. But I don't know if there's a difference, biologically, the brain matter is, we've all evolved from the same roots, according to Darwinian evolution, but I don't know what could justify if humans are the only ones that have souls.
You did say that you cannot really, you don't have any evidence or you can't justify these, empirically or scientifically. So, what is your criteria? Because inevitably you can stumble on this idea of faith, that if we believe in something and if we believe it to be true, then is that true? And can we apply it to our own reality? So, what is your criteria
reply in one sentence.
Yeah, what is your argument regarding, like, how do you say that something has evidence versus not?
Well, a lot of the things we know are proven because until we found something that will disprove it. So according to everything we know, I've stated everything that I know, and that quantum computers may or may not work based on. Currently it does, but I believe in the future it won't because there are certain things that we know is a matter of randomness. I mean, let me give an example. For example, antimatter. It's found in bananas. Surprising. That's the only food I think. And basically, antimatter just disappears randomly. Oh yeah, antimatter can just randomly disappear. So that's one occurrence of randomness, and I'm sure there's much more in the universe.
I do. Okay. So for the randomness thing, let's say that antimatter exists, and that antimatter is like a randomness based on it. Well, in the moment that the randomness happened or whatever actions were taken because of the randomness, does that affect the way that does that affect the future? Because although it does create randomness, it creates like a new origin of actions and a sequence of things that happen. So there's one randomness in the evidence random. Would you agree?
It depends. But I could have also, if you don't mind, you have an answer for that.
Okay, yeah, maybe, like, since, okay, we're not totally sure, again, a lot of things here is not sure about, maybe even everything. So,
The only thing I know is that I'm nothing.
yeah, basically. So that we might not even be sure if it is randomness. Maybe there's a parallel world or worlds acting on the antimatter, because just because we can't prove why it suddenly disappears doesn't mean it's just total randomness.
Okay, something else I want to bring up is, like, there was this idea that maybe a lot of our actions are triggered purely by instincts and purely by, like, most of our unconscious acts, most of the animals actually in this day and age, or like in our day-to-day life in this day and age, is unconscious. And like there's a certain elements of wiring and choice, and like there's with choices. So I would maybe like perhaps take this example where although someone may have a brain, say someone has an addiction to alcohol, and they stop being addicted to alcohol by choice or by fighting against the addiction, are they not inherently going against brain wiring of someone of having inherent brain wiring once you become addicted to a substance to continually taking and ingesting it? And also, I'd like to raise this point. It's maybe a bit philosophical. Like, what do you want to live in the world? We haven't yet established that free will does exist. I think the main argument against free will is that scientifically we can't prove it, or it's like we're just a bunch of atoms. Remember Man from Dust to King, from Dust to Charles Darwin. I mean, it's like there's this element. There's also that idea like we're just atoms moving around, atoms of choice. I believe this is my biggest argument for free will. So what do you want, my question is, would you rather live in a world with free will or a world without free will?
I would like to so first one's like the alcohol addiction, against that. I think what prompted the person to quit alcohol, quit the addiction, was the circumstances that allowed him. For example, let's say maybe someone who's loved died, or she or her died, and then because they felt so concerned with his addiction, let's say something happened. I think that is still circumstance, and even though the instinct was addiction, some outside external circumstance was beyond the instinct. That's it's just 3 seconds I go. Your second point was saying like, would you rather live in a world with free will or without free will? I think, well, like as humans, like we obviously want control, like we want to be able to control things, right? I think I would rather live in a world of free will. However, I do not believe that it is.
Wait, I want to respond to the point. So you bring up an interesting point, like circumstance. So this is an idea that is brought up in many different theories of free will, like the libertarian point of view, which states that your circumstance is purely circumstantial, it's not free will, or like for instance, if a family member has been captured by like a mafia and you're forced to rob someone, and you rob someone, it's not necessarily free will, you know you do have a choice. So it's interesting. I'll circle back to that. This idea that, okay, you have this outside circumstance. But my only answer to you would be, what about all those other people who have the same shop or a similar shop, maybe even within the same family, and decided not to give up drinking or to give up their addiction? Now, this idea turns to the idea of necessarily talking about, like, okay, if I do have free will, let's say I am a victim of circumstance, or like circumstances are always pushing on us, right? So, like, for instance, we always have to be pain. Why do I show up to class every day? Well, part of it is because I love learning. The other part is because I want to make sure I do great. So, like, it's not necessarily, there's part of it is my choice because I want to learn, and there's part of it that I'm being forced by circumstances. Now, Aristotle brings up this cool idea, which is the fact that, okay, so let's go back to the mafia example. So for instance, you're not morally responsible for doing something evil if the evil you're trying to prevent is greater. So for instance, you kill someone in the name of stopping at all. You're trying to prevent a greater evil, but you've done a crime or murdered someone in a way to try to achieve a grander goal or objective. Now, this is really very big, slippery slope, as we've seen many times in history where people have tried to reach utopia on the bones of many other people. But it's an interesting idea, and I think this is bring it up. Because it's a points about that.
I think it's to points. It's a very interesting conversation. If we talk about the sort of sense in which the free will is an external, they did a study about giving cocaine to rats, and rats that live in a very sterile environment would choose 100% the cocaine water over regular water to live in that. Whereas rats that were with crappy rats in nice environments, you would choose the water over the cocaine water. Now, what can we say about the world around us? It says that yes, you're more likely to have a choice, and say you have a choice, when you live in a world in which you're living in a supportive environment, you're living in an environment in which you have the ability to make a choice. But it was a very good, I did an MLK Day presentation about tango. And there's
Excellent presentation.
there's a really good song called Bread. It's about this man who stole a loaf of bread to feed his family. And he's all over thinking about all the different circumstances that led him to have to steal a loaf of bread and come to the point where he's going to face justice for it. There comes a point where, yes, you have free will, but the choices you have and different doors you can choose are very limited. So you can choose among those doors, but the selection doors are narrow in a certain sense.
And I think that's also testament to this idea of how it is impossible for us to evade our environmental circumstance. It is impossible for us to evade the influence of our environment on our morality, on our perceptions of the world, and how we carry ourselves into modernity. And I think, like, transitioning from all that we've discussed, now it may be important to evaluate how do we think past Bible members, or even past members of society, may have, I guess, debated on free will, and how they may have conferred on different notions of free will, and do we even think that these ideas of free will have developed significantly over time as we do the transition into modernity? What do we think about that?
Do you want to speak? Cool.
No worries. Anybody else? Okay, so my question was, given the nature of this motion as being one that was debated frequently by past Philo members, and also given the fact that Philo is an exceedingly old club founded in the early 1800s, how do we think that notions of free will may have developed over time into modernity? Do we think that free will has evolved over time? This also draws back to the ideas of being product of our environmental circumstances and how our environmental experiences may conflict with our morality.
I think I can only best speak to the fact that, obviously technology has evolved to the point where we can make certain determination about the way that we live and the way that we live in, right? And like, for example, we've created experiments such as what you mentioned, where, rats get to make a choice, but are they really making a choice? I mean, addiction to a certain extent is not a choice. And, it's one weird thing, it's not, but just from a technological perspective, we can, will we reach that point where we're at zero and we can certainly say that there will never be any free will at any point because everything's predictable, that these benches will always stay where they are? Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated question, but I also wanted to ask, this might seem like a very simple question, but I think it's I think it's more complicated than it might seem. What changes when you apply free will, if free will isn't here right now, if we don't have free will? What's the change?
What do you mean by that necessarily? Because, so kind of,
I don't know, that's my question.
so like what? Like, we live in a right, we live theoretically right now, we don't have free will. Well then, what we're doing is going through motions, guys. We're going through like cells or quarks. And what we're doing is just pretension. We're just monkeys with very big brains who thought, hey, we have this discussion here. That's all preordained. Not necessarily by God, but by biology, by nature. So in a way, it's almost, I think it's almost just as, you almost have to have the same amount of belief in God to not believe in free will. It's kind of my idea on it. And it's kind of connected on this idea of what past Philo members would have thought of this debate. They would have looked at this through a very Calvinistic point of view, where it's like, okay, God exists, but he preordained everything. So there's a group of people who are going to be saved already, and everything. And this is just like the quote roll credits screen, where you're like going through everyone's going through the motions, and this is kind of complicated where it goes to theology. I'm no theological expert, but I'm not a Protestant or a Calvinist, so to be more specifically. But basically, it's the idea where God creates everything to people who are going to be saved, and there's this free will exists, but free will exists and there's more culpability if you decide to choose to do something. If it goes against, if you allow your lower nature, your sinfulness allows it, like you do something because their lower nature repels you from it. And even though it's preordained, you still have more culpability to get into it, even though God already saw it. I think it's a very interesting theological position, very complex, but one that I don't personally agree with.
I think, very quickly, it would be very strange for us not to have free will and talk about free will. Just maybe about that.
I'll take some of your questions, and I really like that idea of questions on a little bit, but I'd like to expand like what Philo used the fact that the preordained, like how 200 years ago, like there are some different beliefs and ideologies.
Especially people who would probably occupy this place would be very...
Yes. Okay, so I think it's a really good question. So I think like another aspect is for technology. Now that we know about like how atoms like collide with each other, like how we know more about technology, I feel like this is part because now that we can like confidently like examine atoms like more like we know that atoms will change, we know that things move. So that's much but also one of your points saying how will things change if we have free will, because hypothetically in this situation we don't, right? I personally believe that nothing would change because right now, even if say we don't have free will or we have free will, we, regardless of age, we still feel like we have free will. We still feel like we're going in the same direction. We still feel like that. And to us, whether you believe it or, well, I guess believing it could change what you do. But I feel like either way, you still have some belief that you can control what you do. So I feel like even if there is free will versus it doesn't change how you believe that, if that makes any sense. Just because if there was free will versus there wasn't free will, it doesn't change the fact that you still believe you can do all of this.
Does anybody disagree with this rule?
What?
Do you disagree? Does anybody disagree?
With my point on that, it wouldn't change anything if it exists.
I kind of agree that nothing will change. Like, it's just all a reaction. Like we're just living in the same world, except we don't know about free will. We believe in free will. Because everyone kind of acts. Like everyone acts with the supposition that they do have choices. And people always choose. People always choose. So I would say it's not even, it's an interesting scenario, interesting thought. But I don't want to say necessarily it's like a reality. Because everyone, even if people don't believe in free will, they still operate off the assumption of free will. You see something shocking, you see something evil in the world, like how dare they, or how dare he, she, like do this terrible thing in this world. Like there is this, I would say even primal idea that, yeah, you have choices. And if you do something bad, you're bad.
Do do you even have the right to be upset at that guy if you don't have free will? Like,
Exactly.
can you yell at that guy, at that lady, can you yell at that cashier for messing up your order? Can you tell that person, like, you're an idiot, you can't fix it. You need to just quit. Can you be justifiably upset if it was fated to happen? That thing, that error was just meant to be. They mess up your order 15, 20, 30 times. I'm just an example.
He's giving honest to God, real world examples.
Maybe.
I think they are to blame because I had a thought there. It's basically it doesn't matter if there actually is free will or not because we will never acquire a supercomputer, and without acquiring it, we will never know. So therefore,
hope in this supercomputer.
Guys, 10-minute warning.
Have faith in supercomputer. I have faith.
okay, well maybe I can't say anything for certain, but if we don't have access to the supercomputer, then it will not affect us in any way, and your choices are still yours because this consciousness acts upon your choices. And if I were to stand up right there and strip naked, that is my choice, but I'm not going to do that because of my current circumstances.
So we're trying to the idea of current circumstances. Yeah, you still have the choice. Just because you want to do it, doesn't mean you don't have the choice.
Yes, I totally have the power to, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, we don't have the power to do that. Like right now, we're just get out and screaming. Okay, so this is a lovely conversation with lovely group of people. Now, I also like to return back to this idea of what would the old Andoverians, Philippians, old Philomatheans, how do you say old, how do you say Philomatheans? The Philomaths would say about free will.
I'd like to go on, there's 3 points now. So, your point saying, could you even get mad at a person for messing up your order? I think that is whether you believe free will exists or not. If you say you don't believe free will exists, then get mad at what you're saying?
I mean, yeah, to an extent, but like, even in another example, like just say I'm sitting in traffic, right? Like, can I, or sitting, in cashier's aisle, right? And I'm behind somebody who's like counting orders or something, like drawing, just like putting orders. It's a very specific example to get you to think, right? And like, I mean, do I have the right to feel this way? Maybe. But should I feel this way? And can I think about not feeling this way? And can I make a decision not to feel this way? This is a very, it gets very moral. And this is really where people like David Foster Wallace or, ancient philosophers come in to tell you, yeah, exactly. Should I feel bad about this? Do I have the conscious decision not to go to my job and just quit it? Or become a millionaire all of a sudden? Can I just sit on my couch for 24 hours? And if I'm fated to become the president of the United States, will that happen?
I think this is kind of coming from this old adage that you cannot control what happens to you, not control what you do. You react to a system. Yeah, very so. Yeah, I just read one reading all the artists where this
Also, your point is like, how can we be debating free will if we don't have free will? Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah, these were how do you
Alright. Is that your point? Like, how can we have free will
I'm not saying anything with it. I think I'm just pointing out that it's really strange for creatures to not have free will yet come up with the idea of free will. And we're going to grab the argument that, Platonic
world of forms?
world of forms, I guess, from kind of not realize that, like, if you just conceive of something this thing, how could it exist? Perhaps it's something, I really like my personal theory of the narrow doors, where like you're technically doing what you want, but circumstances kind of limit you. I mean, technically there is a possibility that you can be lying on your couch all day and a day like the president of the United States. There was instances where King Louis XVI, for example, was working on his laws when he heard his father died, and he said, "By God, help me to rule." But the circumstances how that this was the case for a monk who just became pope. He tasked to get basically the stuff together.
I mean, he was living in heaven. What is living in man like man is such a great guy.
Yeah, it should be hope. But like that happens. Weird things happen. So it's not fate.
I agree with that point, but then I also think no, exactly, to that point. The choice is always there. I feel that this ability to have free will is innate to all humans, perhaps, or at least to the extent that we measure it. But that environmental impact will always be there. The weight of those environmental impacts will always be there, albeit false, perhaps, albeit there are societal distinctions that we abide by. And I think now, drawing this back to, once again, how we think the past Philomatheans may have debated this, like in our setting, we all arguably do have the free will to have these discussions and to have these varying opinions that may differ entirely from the way that past Philo members sat here, perhaps in this very space and debated them. I mean, do we collectively believe that, or deny that, our arguments here, our unique perspectives here were preordained to some extent, especially when measuring the differences that they have to past Philomatheans?
And I know both of you talked about instinct, right? And I think this is going to be my most important thing to conclude. So I really wanted to say that, eventually we will move away from instinct because we won't need it anymore. Maybe in a couple 100,000 years, we won't have it anymore, right? And because we evolve, then does that mean that we will not be restricted by instinct, and then free will will be 100% pure, and then it will, exist forever, and then we'll live in, little bases, we can crawl around, like that. Is it?
Dancing. Yeah, but if you were living in a utopian society, your instinct would kick in and say, oh wait, this is not right.
Well, I think we can have a conversation about utopia after this, but I think that this is go back to the idea quickly. I want to acknowledge Rania's wishes to discuss old Philomatheans. I think we are, by extent, a product of history. We're all Philomatheans, old Philomatheans, but we're all products of history, right? We all get impacted by history. You can say that maybe those old Philomathean people were okay, they must have talked about history. History must have been very important, the forefront of the minds. There must have been some. There's a very popular theory called great man theory. It's a small tangent, but there was this idea there are things that are predestined to happen. There's predestined to be some great country to conquer all these other countries, like manifest destiny. This is the idea where it's predestined for America to conquer the West, or this predestined idea that some people are going to conquer other people, some people are destined to be better than others. In all respects. But I think there's this idea, there was this idea of predeterminism. I think a lot of, you can even look in the past recently, lots of predetermined ideas about predeterminism, about people believing that things were preordained by God, which, funny enough, it's kind of contradictory in a way.
Yeah, just would probably that's a form of comment. But just to add to the point of the final comment. Great man history is definitely attracted. I think it was definitely the forefront of many people build as definitely some Philomanic ideas. This idea of was that predestined? But this idea of there are some people who are destined to conquer things. That's a lot of Philomanic connotations to it. So as we reach the 21st century, I think it's important to talk about we have a target of history that evolved since the 19th century to the 20th century, 21st century. So we'll just see how that evolves. Yes, no.
Finish your point.
No.
I was going to invite other people just to have final thoughts.
Can we just conclude our opinions on that one?
Sure.
I'm thinking.
Oh, yes. We can go last.
Okay.
I think fundamentally we are products. We will have free will, but we're also products of our environment. There's only so much you can control in life. And it's very unlikely for a man from Argentina to become president of Mars. Very unlikely. But is it possible? But it's very unlikely. The narrow, as you get older, the amount of options you get that are available to you get narrower and narrower. Doesn't mean that you still break away from the norm. It's just like we're living with it. And that's basically where we are. So we have feel free will, but it's very much heavily dependent on circumstances.
I believe that 100% and 0% don't exist, however, infinity does. And infinity can turn what is seemingly zero into certain things, such as there's theories of the Big Bang that Big Bang just came from nothing, because if nothing was to interact with an infinite amount of time, something would appear. But But yeah, going back to free will, I believe that free will is actually a myriad of options, actually infinite options, and in every decision that you take, and even decisions you don't take, a parallel world is created somewhere, and that will somehow impact our world too.
I found that it's a very interesting theory. I personally believe in free will, and I believe that free will exists because I believe that this is more of a personal sanity thing, where I believe that without free will, you can't be good or evil. And I think that's important. So free will, that's my first point. Second, although we are products of history, we are impacted by the past, we're impacted by our ancestors. We can still make choices, and I think our ancestors made choices. Maybe there's someone more compelled by their environment, but it doesn't mean they have the choice to do certain things. So I do believe simultaneously that without free will, there's no morality, and and though we are products of the past, we can still make choices for the future, which is really relevant nowadays. So.
Well, I mean,
There are a lot of things that can be said. I think, just to express my opinions, I think that there is free will. I believe there are, we can make decisions. On a personal note, I believe in the Catholic and Christian philosophies that have existed for a very long time, and that's just a religious perspective. I know that there are a number of ideas that exist for or against these points of view, and I just so happen to be one of those who believes in free will.
I like to leave off my personal opinion because I'm raised on free will, and also I like to express how amazing it is that we are here today debating free will. And like you said earlier, if we didn't have free will and we used to come up with amazing thing, I just like to leave off saying, well, if we don't have something and it doesn't exist as we can imagine, if there was like a 200-foot tall banana tree with a bunch of bananas, that doesn't exist. It couldn't exist, but I can imagine it.
To conclude, to be honest, I'm not really sure why I'm here. I think that it was a very enlightening experience to hear all you guys' thoughts on free will and to really gain a deeper understanding of that. I think, in my personal opinion, free will does exist. I think that, albeit it is this intangible sort of thing that you just have to believe or you don't believe, but in my personal opinion, I think it exists.
Yes, and to finally conclude, I also believe that free will exists, and I guess on a more extreme level, I feel that free will is an essential product of our experience as humans, and it is testament to the human spirit, perhaps. And I do feel also that this notion of the human spirit is relatively idealistic, and perhaps having the choice, as mentioned in all these various circumstances, is a luxury in itself. It is a luxury that humans have. And perhaps also there are discussions in which conceptions of human free will are anthropocentric to humans and do not take into account all the other perceptions of free will that there may be in worlds beyond what we know and beyond what we can fathom. And I think that drawing back to arguments to science is a viable platform for examining free will, but so is religion and so is morality. So I think that as we've discussed with past Philo members, or as past Philo members have discussed, theories constantly change, and theories of free will constantly change, and they relate directly to science and morality and religion. And I think that, to conclude, these theories will continue to evolve over time, just as we have seen them do since past Philo members debating this motion to our modern interpretations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.